The aliens' last hope at the alien world of Gyra was once a flourishing civilization. A beacon of power in the far reaches of the galaxy, the Gyrians had built towering cities, advanced technologies, and mighty fleets. They were the masters of their domain, feared and respected by every species they encountered. But now, in the dark shadows of their own sky, their greatest enemies were closing in. For the first time in their history, the Gyrians were not prepared. Their armies were scattered, their defenses barely holding up, and their advanced weaponry seemed like nothing more than a distant memory. The enemy, a brutal race known as the Gornax, had launched a surprise attack on their homeworld. They were relentless, and the Gyrians found themselves facing an invasion that seemed unstoppable. In the heart of their capital city, the leaders of Gyra gathered in an emergency council meeting. The once grand hall, now dimly lit by flickering lights, was filled with the sounds of anxious murmurs. The city was crumbling around them, and the air was thick with fear. The council leaders, dressed in their ceremonial robes, sat at a long table, their faces grim. "Time is running out," Commander Zaylor, the head of the Gyrian military, said, his voice shaking with the weight of their situation. "Our forces are scattered. We cannot hold off the Gornax much longer. If we do not act now, we will be destroyed." The room fell silent, the gravity of Zaylor's words hanging in the air. It seemed like there was no hope left. But then, one of the council members, a wise elder named Vera, spoke up. "What if we send a distress signal?" Vera suggested, her voice soft but determined. "We have allies, powerful allies. Perhaps there is someone out there who can help us." The room erupted in debate, with some council members dismissing the idea. They had been betrayed by allies before, and many believed that no one would come to their aid. But Vera's words sparked something in the room. It was their last chance. They had to try. Zaylor leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the table in thought. "It's risky," he said, "but we have no other option. We send the signal and we hope anyone answers." After a tense silence, the council agreed. The signal would go out. In the highest tower of the city, far from the chaos of the streets below, a group of elite engineers worked quickly to prepare the communication system. The ancient device, a relic from the time of their ancestors, was their last hope. The engineers, their hands trembling as they worked, knew the importance of their task. If the signal could reach even one of their allies, they might stand a chance. But time was running out. "We're ready," the chief engineer, Coral, said. His voice was calm, but there was fear in his eyes. "The distress signal is ready to launch." Zaylor stood beside him, looking out at the burning skyline of the city. "Send it," he ordered. His voice was firm, but deep down he too wondered if anyone would hear them. The Gyrians had made enemies across the galaxy, and who would come to their aid now? Still, he held onto a sliver of hope. The engineer pressed the final button, and the signal shot into the void of space. The Gyrian fleet, their last remaining ships, continued to fight above the planet, but the outcome seemed inevitable. It was a battle they could not win. The distress signal was their final act of desperation. Their message echoed through the vast emptiness, hoping that somewhere someone would hear. "We have sent the message," Zaylor said, turning to the council. "Now, we wait." But as the hours ticked by, the council members grew more restless. The sky outside darkened, and the sound of distant explosions rattled the building. The Gornax were getting closer. The last remnants of Gyra's defenses were crumbling under the weight of the enemy's assault. Suddenly, a signal flashed on the screen in front of them. It was faint at first, but unmistakable, a response to their distress call. The room fell silent as every eye turned to the screen. What came next was not what they had expected. The voice on the other end was cold, mechanical, and emotionless. It wasn't an ally. It wasn't a friendly species offering help. The message was simple, chilling, and clear. "We have received your distress signal. Help is on the way. Prepare for the arrival of the Deathworlder Fleet." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The Gyrians exchanged nervous glances. Who were the Deathworlders? What did they want? Before they could react, the screen flickered again, showing a map of the galaxy, with a red dot rapidly moving toward their system. The fleet was already on its way. The response had come quickly, but it was not the help they had imagined. Instead, it was a fleet of humans, Deathworlders, whose reputation for savagery and conquest was known across the galaxy. Panic spread through the room. The Gyrians had hoped for a savior, but now they feared that their hope had been their undoing. The humans were not here to save them, they were here to destroy them. Zaylor's heart sank. He had believed that someone would come to their aid, but now he realized that they had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not coming to help. They were coming to conquer. "Prepare for the worst," Zaylor said, his voice low and filled with dread. "The Deathworlder Fleet is coming." And with that, the last hope of the Gyrian civilization was crushed. The responsive Gyrian council room fell into complete silence as the last words of the message echoed in the air. The screen flickered with a red dot racing toward them, marking the approaching doom. Commander Zalor's mind raced. Trying to make sense of what was happening, the Deathworlder Fleet was real humans. The infamous warriors from Earth, known for their brutality and unmatched combat skills. They were no saviors, they were predators. Is there any chance it's a mistake, Coral? The chief engineer asked, his voice barely a whisper. His hands trembled as he stood by the console, his gaze fixed on the flashing red dot on the map. Could they be here to help? Zalor shook his head, his expression hardening. I know humans. They don't help, they conquer. Vera, the wise elder, stepped forward, her face lined with worry and age. We've made a grave mistake. We thought this was our salvation, but instead, we've invited the wolves to our door. Zalor clenched his fists, his jaw tight. We can't let them take us without a fight. But as the hours dragged on, the reality set in. The fleet of human ships grew closer. Each ship a beast of war, a metal titan gliding through the stars. The message had been clear. They were coming for them, not to offer mercy, but to take control. And the Gyrians had no choice but to prepare for the worst. The news spread across the planet like wildfire. The Gyrian military scrambled to put up any defense they could. Their once proud fleet was scattered, and most of their soldiers were already fighting on the front lines, far from their homeworld. There was no time to call reinforcements. There was no one left to call Dot in the capital city. Civilians flooded the streets, their faces filled with terror and confusion. They had been taught that the Gyrians were invincible, that no enemy could ever touch them. But now, they were facing an enemy that did not fear them. They were facing the Deathworlders, the humans. As night fell, the air was thick with dread. The sky, once a beautiful canvas of stars, now seemed to pulse with the looming threat. The faint glow of the human ships grew brighter, and in the distance, the Gyrian military began to launch their last-ditch efforts. But their weapons were no match for the human fleet. The Deathworlders had perfected the art of war. In a hidden underground bunker, Commander Zalor stood with his top generals, watching the live feed of the approaching fleet. His hands were clenched into tight fists, his mind working furiously to come up with a plan. There had to be something they could do. They could not just roll over and surrender. Gather the troops. Zalor ordered, prepare for battle. We may be outnumbered, but we will make them pay for every inch they take. But even as he said the words, Zalor knew deep down that the odds were against them. The humans were too powerful, their weapons too advanced. The Gyrians were no longer the empire they once were. They were a dying race, and the humans would see to it that they were wiped from the galaxy. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew this battle would decide the fate of their civilization. The streets outside were filled with people, some trying to flee, others trying to prepare for what was coming. It was chaos, fear. The Gyrians had no idea what they were truly up against. The Deathworlders were not just another enemy to fight, they were a force of nature. A storm that would sweep everything before them. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the city. The lights in the underground bunker flickered, and the screens in front of Zalor went blank. A loud rumble shook the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of ships landing on the planet's surface. The humans were here. They've arrived, Zalor whispered, his voice grim. Prepare yourselves outside. The first wave of human soldiers descended, their ships cutting through the atmosphere with terrifying speed. Their armor glinted in the fading light of the day, and their weapons were unlike anything the Gyrians had ever seen. They moved with precision, an unyielding force. Zalor's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the first few human soldiers step foot on the surface of Gyra. It was the beginning of the end. There would be no retreat. There would be no mercy. In the skies above, the Gyrian ships made one last stand, firing all their weapons at the incoming Deathworlder fleet. The blasts lit up the sky, but it was no use. The human ships were already tearing through the atmosphere, their shields deflecting every attack. They didn't even slow down. Zalor's mind raced as he realized the full extent of the disaster. The humans weren't here to fight for their freedom. They were here to wipe out every trace of the Gyrian Empire, to leave nothing behind. In the final moments before the battle began, as the human soldiers closed in on the city, Zalor received one last message. It was a simple, short message, but it chilled him to his core. Surrender or face total annihilation. Your world is ours now. Zalor looked around at his generals, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and helplessness. We fight, he said, his voice unwavering. We fight until the very end. But even as he spoke, he knew there was no escaping the fate that awaited them. The Deathworlders had come, and they would leave nothing but destruction in their wake. The Gyrians' last hope was nothing more than a flicker in the vast darkness of space. The end had come, and there was no turning back. Asters, the fleet approached us. The Gyrian people had always seen themselves as the apex of civilization, rulers of the stars. For eons, they had been a force to be reckoned with, their fleet a terrifying presence in the galaxy. Yet now, as the human fleet approached, it felt as if the universe was laughing at their arrogance. No matter how advanced their technology, it seemed so fragile compared to the unstoppable might heading their way. Commander Zaylor stood atop a high tower in the capital city, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the human fleet loomed. The massive ships filled the sky like dark shadows, blocking out the stars. Their design was unlike anything the Gyrians had ever seen, sleek, angular, but with a brutality that suggested only one thing: these ships were built for war. Their engines burned with the fire of 1,000 suns as they descended upon Gyra. "They're here," Zaylor whispered to himself. The words more a statement of disbelief than a declaration of readiness. It wasn't just the size of the fleet that sent chills down his spine, it was the sheer coldness of their presence. There was no fanfare, no triumph. The humans weren't here to announce their victory, they had already claimed it. In the streets below, panic began to spread like wildfire. The once bustling city, a testament to Gyrian pride, was now a site of chaos and confusion. The sounds of alarms echoed through the streets as the last remnants of the Gyrian military scrambled to assemble a defense. It was a futile effort, Zaylor knew that much. Their weapons were no match for the humans' firepower. At the military command center, General Vera stood staring at the screens, watching the approaching fleet. "We can't hold them off, their ships. They're unlike anything we've encountered before," she said, her voice filled with resignation. "Have you tried negotiating?" Zaylor asked, though he already knew the answer. "The humans didn't negotiate, they conquered. We sent them a message," Vera replied. "But it's clear they have no intention of speaking with us. They want only one thing: to wipe us from the galaxy." Zaylor's fists clenched. For a brief moment, he felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. He had failed his people. He had failed his planet. The thought of surrendering, of kneeling before these human invaders, sickened him. But he knew there was no fighting it. The human fleet entered Gyra's atmosphere with terrifying speed. Their weapon systems powered up, and the first volleys of energy blasts lit up the sky, striking the ground below. The city shook with the impact of the explosions, and entire districts were vaporized in the blink of an eye. "We have to do something," a Gyrian soldier cried, his voice laced with panic. "We can't just sit here and watch our world burn." Zaylor turned to him, his expression stone cold. "We fight, but not for victory. We fight because that is the last thing we can do for Gyra." The Gyrian fleet had already been torn apart by the human ships. The few remaining ships launched a desperate counterattack, but it was clear they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience to the Deathworlder fleet. Their weapons were ineffective, their shields weak against the advanced human technology above them. The skies turned red as explosions rocked the city. Zaylor could feel the heat even from the tower. He clenched his teeth and turned back to the control panel. "What are our ground forces reporting?" he asked, his voice now low and strained. "Sir," came the voice of an officer, "our forces are engaging human ground troops, but their armor, it's unlike anything we've seen. We can't break through." The commander nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The humans had perfected not only their ships but their soldiers as well. The Gyrian warriors, with their advanced armor and weapons, were simply outclassed. "We need to regroup," Zaylor ordered. "Fall back to the central bunker. We'll prepare for a final stand. If we are to die, we die on our terms." As Zaylor and his generals made their way to the bunker, the ground beneath them shook with another explosion. It was becoming harder to breathe. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal, and the sky above them was dark with smoke and fire. The humans' invasion had begun. In the heart of the capital, Gyrians who had once lived in luxury were now fighting to survive. People ran for shelter as the streets were bombarded, their homes crumbling under the relentless firepower of the human assault. It felt as though the entire city was collapsing, and yet, the humans seemed to care little for the destruction they caused. It was all part of their plan, part of their conquest. "Is there any hope?" General Vera asked. As she caught up with Zaylor, Zaylor paused, looking out at the devastation. "Hope," he repeated, "is a luxury we can no longer afford." But in the depths of his heart, a part of him refused to give up. The Gyrians had fought for generations to hold their place in the galaxy. They were not just going to disappear without a fight. There was one thing left they could do: resist. "We resist until the very end," Zaylor declared, his voice firm. "We will make them pay for every inch they take." Yet, as the ground shook beneath their feet and the human soldiers advanced, Zaylor couldn't shake the nagging thought in his mind. Was this their final fight? Had they truly made the mistake of calling for help only to bring about their own destruction? The Deathworlder fleet was getting closer, and the final battle for Gyra had begun. But Zaylor couldn't help but wonder if they survived this. What would be left of their once great empire? Would Gyra ever rise again? Or was this the beginning of the end for the Gyrian people as the humans closed in It became clearer than ever that the Gyrians were facing an enemy like no other. The true test had begun, and it would determine whether they lived to see the next sunrise, or whether their world would become another forgotten memory in the galaxy's dark history. Asterisk, the first strike, the ground beneath Gyra quaked once more, the earth groaning as the weight of destruction fell from the skies. The human fleet, relentless and merciless, had taken full control of the atmosphere. In the city streets, fires raged, and the sounds of battle echoed through every corner of the once proud capital. Zaylor stood before a large tactical screen in the command center beneath the city, staring at the red dots that moved across the map like predators hunting their prey. The humans had arrived in force, and it was clear they weren't stopping until everything was reduced to ash. The Gyrian resistance was already falling apart. Their once mighty fleets had been obliterated in mere minutes. Their cities, once shining symbols of their power, were now burning husks. The first human strike was swift. Their weapons were devastating. A beam of pure energy fired from one of the enormous ships above, cutting through the Gyrian defenses like a hot knife through butter. The beam hit a vital structure in the heart of the city, causing a massive explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the streets. Buildings crumbled, and the sky above became a storm of fiery debris. Gyrians were dying by the thousands. Zaylor watched the destruction unfold with a heavy heart, his mind racing. This was worse than he'd feared. The Gyrians had always prided themselves on their advanced technology, on their dominance over lesser races, but the humans had come prepared to prepared. Their technology was a force of nature, each strike sending a reminder of their superior strength. "They're tearing us apart," Vera said, her voice filled with sorrow. "I didn't think it would come to this. Our world is dying before our eyes." Zalor's jaw clenched, but he refused to show weakness. "We still have a chance," he said, though even he wasn't sure what that chance looked like anymore. "We may be outnumbered, but we can't let them take everything without a fight." Despite the chaos outside, the command center was eerily silent. The generals and officers surrounding Zaylor were either too stunned or too defeated to speak. Their world was crumbling, and nothing they could do would stop it. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed open. A Gyrian soldier entered, his armor scorched and his face smeared with dirt. "Commander," he gasped, his breath ragged. "The humans, they've landed. The first wave is already on the surface. They're moving fast. They'll reach us in minutes." Zalor's heart skipped a beat. "They're here." Without a word, he motioned for his generals to follow. "Get the remaining forces to the surface. We fight them in the streets if we must. Rally the citizens. We may be outgunned, but we will not go down without a fight." The soldiers rushed out of the command center, and Zaylor followed closely behind. As he stepped into the streets, the sight that met his eyes was even worse than he had imagined. The city was in complete chaos. The fires had spread, and the once pristine roads were now cracked and torn, littered with debris. Gyrian soldiers were trying to regroup, but the humans were already pushing forward, their armored troops moving with deadly precision. Zaylor could see them now. The humans, Deathworlders, coming down from their ships in perfect formation. They wore dark, intimidating armor, their faces hidden behind glowing visors. Their weapons gleamed in the dim light, each one designed to end lives with brutal efficiency. They moved like a single, unfeeling unit, with no hesitation, no mercy. The Gyrians fought valiantly, launching what little offensive they had left. But it was clear they were outmatched. The humans responded quickly, their weapons lighting up the sky. Gyrian soldiers fell with horrifying ease as the Deathworlders unleashed wave after wave of destructive firepower. Zalor's heart raced as he watched the humans advance. There was no honor in this fight. There was no sense of justice. The Deathworlders weren't here for a battle. They were here to annihilate everything in their path. "We have to fall back," Vera shouted, her voice tinged with desperation. "We're being overwhelmed." Zaylor shook his head. "We fight," he said firmly, despite the sinking feeling in his chest. "We stand our ground. We can't let them take everything. This is our world. We defend it until the end." As the Gyrians began their last stand, Zaylor couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision on his shoulders. This was it, the final hour for his people. Their proud empire was crumbling, and there was nothing left but their will to fight. The human soldiers advanced with unrelenting force. They didn't seem to care about the buildings they were destroying or the lives they were taking. To them, this wasn't a conquest, it was simply another mission. Another victory. In the distance, Zaylor could see the main human commander, standing atop a war machine, watching the devastation unfold. His figure was cold and calculated, his movements deliberate. He was in control of everything, the chaos, the destruction. And as Zaylor watched, the human leader raised a hand, signaling for the next wave of attacks. The sky darkened as the next barrage of energy weapons rained down from above. Gyrian soldiers scrambled for cover, but there was no escaping the firepower. of the Deathworlders, explosions ripped through the ground, sending plumes of dust and smoke into the air. Xalar felt his heart tighten. How had it come to this? How had his people so powerful, so proud, been brought to their knees by these ruthless invaders? The fight was far from over. But the Gyrians could already feel the weight of defeat settling upon them. There was no victory to be had. Only the question of how much more they could endure before their world was lost forever. The Deathworlder Fleet had struck, and there was no turning back. The Gyrians had fought valiantly, but they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever known. And now, as the smoke filled the air and the sounds of battle continued to echo across the planet, Xalar had to face the harsh reality. Gyra was lost. Last stand. Gyra's once proud capital now lay in ruins, a testament to the fury of the Deathworlders. The sky, once a symbol of life and hope, was now a fiery battleground, streaked with the flashes of energy beams and the thick, choking smoke of burning buildings. The planet that had once been the pride of the galaxy was now on the brink of annihilation. Xalar stood at the edge of what was left of the Gyrian command center, his eyes locked onto the horizon. The Deathworlder Fleet had made their move, and their soldiers were everywhere. Every street, every building, every corner was a battlefield. It was clear that this was not just an invasion, it was an extinction event. We can't hold out much longer, Commander General Vera said, her voice strained with fatigue. The remaining forces are scattered. The citizens, what's left of them, are hiding in the underground bunkers. But that's no guarantee they'll be safe for long. Xalar's face was drawn, but his gaze never wavered. He could feel the weight of his people's history, their legacy, pressing down on him for generations. The Gyrians had ruled the stars, they had conquered, they had expanded, and they had made enemies across the galaxy. But now, in the blink of an eye, everything they had built was collapsing, and he was powerless to stop it. We're not done yet, Xalar said, his voice cold, though the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. I won't let them take everything. Without a final fight, he turned, his armored boots echoing against the cracked floor as he marched toward the small group of soldiers that had gathered around him. They were the last of the Gyrian military, standing together as their city burned, their civilization crumbling. Xalar paused before them. This is the end, he began, his voice low but resolute. But we will not go quietly into the dark. We will fight, for Gyra, for our people, for our future. The soldiers looked at one another, their expressions a mixture of fear, anger, and defiance. They had no illusions about the odds. The Deathworlders were too strong, but they were soldiers, warriors born from the very heart of Gyrian pride, and they would not allow their homeworld to fall without resistance. We're outmatched, Commander, one soldier said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and frustration. Their weapons are too powerful. We don't even know how many they have. Xalar met his gaze. We don't need to know. We fight because it's the only choice we have left. The Gyrians regrouped, pulling together what little resources they had left. They had no ships, no powerful weapons, just their will to survive. Xalar led them into the heart of the city, where the last remnants of the human forces had landed. The streets, once bustling with Gyrian life, were now silent except for the distant sounds of explosions and the thunder of enemy footsteps. As they approached the enemy lines, a flash of light illuminated the street ahead. A Deathworlder war machine, a massive bipedal titan covered in heavy armor, stood tall, its weapons aimed at the horizon. The humans had begun their systematic search for survivors, and the Gyrians were now nothing more than prey to be hunted. Xalar raised his hand, signaling for his troops to stop. They hid in the shadows of ruined buildings, their breath held tight in their chests. The war machine stood still, its weapons unmoving, but its sensors scanning the area with terrifying precision. The Gyrians had no illusions that they could defeat it, but they could make a stand. A soldier beside Xalar, a young recruit, raised his rifle. We need to take it down, now or never. Xalar's mind raced. He knew the odds. They would never bring down a Deathworlder war machine with conventional weapons. But the human forces had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the Gyrians' will to fight. They had underestimated the desperation that came with losing everything. Don't charge yet, Xalar said quietly. We'll give them a reason to underestimate us even more. He motioned for a small group of soldiers to flank the machine. If we can disable its weapons, we might stand a chance. As the soldiers moved into position, Xalar kept his eyes fixed on the war machine. His pulse raced, not from fear, but from the burning need to fight. He wasn't ready to surrender, not yet, not while there was still breath in his lungs. The signal came. The soldiers moved swiftly, their steps barely making a sound. The Gyrian riflemen, skilled in stealth, began their assault. The shots rang out in rapid succession, hitting the war machine's armor in critical spots. It staggered slightly, the impact barely registering in the machine's massive form. But it was enough. The war machine's weapons flickered and shut down as sparks flew from its systems. It roared in frustration, but it was now vulnerable. Xaler took his chance. Now, he shouted. The soldiers surged forward, charging the downed war machine. They were met with resistance. But not from the machine. It was the humans who had underestimated the Gyrians' determination. With every step, the Gyrian forces pushed forward. Driven by the hope of one final victory, the humans, taken by surprise, scrambled to regroup. They had anticipated an easy conquest, not a bloody, desperate resistance. The battle raged in the streets, fierce and unforgiving. Xaler's heart pounded in his chest as he fought his way through the chaos. Every swing of his weapon fueled by the knowledge that this was the last stand of his people. But even as they fought with everything they had, Xaler knew deep down that this was only a temporary victory. The Deathworlders would regroup. They would send in more forces. And in the end, Gyra would fall, but not today, not yet. Today, the Gyrians would fight with the ferocity of a species that had been pushed to the brink. And they would remind the galaxy that they were not so easily forgotten. Asterisk the human ultimatum. Dust from the battle still hung thick in the air. The smell of burning debris lingering like a nightmare. Gyrians and Deathworlders alike lay scattered across the streets, some still moving, others silent. Their bodies twisted in the aftermath of the brutal confrontation. Xaler stood over the fallen war machine, his chest heaving with exertion, the weight of his armor making every breath feel like a struggle. The victory was temporary. He knew that much. The Deathworlders were too numerous, too well equipped. But for this brief moment, Gyra had made them bleed. The humans had learned that the Gyrians were not a race to be extinguished without a fight. And that, in itself, was a victory. Xaler wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes scanning the battlefield. His forces, though battered and bloodied, had held their ground. The humans had underestimated them, and for now, the Gyrians had the upper hand. But the sense of victory was short-lived. As Xaler surveyed the wreckage, a new, more ominous sound reached his ears, the heavy hum of engines. The unmistakable roar of ships descending from the sky. He turned, his pulse quickening. More Deathworlder ships, and this time they were closer. They're coming. Vera's voice echoed in his earpiece, her tone grim. More of them. They've called reinforcements. We can't hold this position much longer. Xaler clenched his fists. They had pushed the humans back for now, but it was clear the battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out from the shadows, cutting through the chaos. A human soldier, towering and imposing, walked forward, flanked by a small group of his comrades. His armor was battle-worn, his face cold and calculating beneath the helmet. But it was the symbol on his chest that caught Xaler's attention, a golden insignia of a lion. Fierce and unyielding. Commander Xaler, the human called out, his voice deep and clear, I offer you a chance. A final chance. Xaler's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. What do you want, human? The Deathworlder soldier stepped forward. His gaze unwavering. I speak for my commander, Captain Rook. The Deathworlder Fleet offers you a choice. Surrender now, and we will spare what remains of your planet. You will cease your resistance and become a part of our galaxy, or we annihilate everything and everyone. You and your people will be forgotten. Xaler's blood boiled at the audacity of the offer. The humans thought they could simply wipe out his people, erase Gyra from existence, and walk away unchallenged. But Xaler wasn't about to let them destroy everything his people had fought for. We will never surrender, Xaler growled, stepping toward the soldier. You want to wipe us out? You'll have to kill every last one of us. We fight for Gyra until our last breath. The human's face remained stoic, but his words carried the weight of command. Then so be it. You've made your choice, Gyrian. Without another word, the human turned and walked away, signaling to his soldiers. As they turned their backs on Xaler, he knew the ultimatum had been made. The Deathworlders would show no mercy now. Xaler's fingers tightened around his blade. It wasn't over. The battle for Gyra had taken an unexpected turn. But the Gyrians weren't ready to give up just yet. They had faced the darkest odds before, and they would face them again. The Deathworlder soldier's words echoed in Xaler's mind. You and your people will be forgotten. That would never happen. The Gyrians would not be forgotten. We will show them the cost of underestimating us, Xaler muttered, his voice resolute. Prepare for the final strike. We won't go quietly. But even as Xaler issued his orders, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, was there even a chance? The Deathworlders were relentless. The humans were relentless. And yet, there was something in the way they fought, something cold, something devoid of mercy that made Xaler question the strength of his people's resolve. Were they truly ready to face the end, or was this the last breath of an empire that had already fallen? As Xaler made his way toward the front lines, the sky above Gyra seemed to darken further. The last light of the day dimmed beneath the shadows of the human ships, and Xaler realized, for the first time, that the fate of his people had been sealed long before this battle had even begun. The Deathworlder fleet was here and there was no escape from the inevitable. The Gyrians had made their stand. Now, all they had left was to fight until the very end. The final outcome the sun had long set on Gyra, leaving only the fiery glow of explosions and the eerie silence between the flashes of energy beams. The battle had reached its darkest hour, and the once beautiful planet now lay in ruins, a testament to the ferocity of the Deathworlder invasion. The Gyrian people, once proud and unyielding, now fought not for victory, but for survival. Xalar stood at the edge of the battlefield, his armor battered and worn, his body aching from the relentless assault. His eyes, once full of determination, now carried a weight of resignation. The Deathworlders had overwhelmed them, their advanced technology and unmatched firepower tearing through Gyra's defenses. With terrifying precision, there were no more ships to launch, no more forces to rally. What remained of the Gyrian military was scattered, and even the civilians who had once looked to their leaders for protection were now nothing more than survivors hiding in the shadows, hoping to escape the wrath of the invaders. But Xalar refused to give up. He refused to let Gyra fall without a final, desperate stand. Commander Vera's voice came over his communicator, breaking the silence. "We've lost contact with the last battalion. There's no one left to fight. The Deathworlders are sweeping the city. We can't stop them." Xalar's grip on his weapon tightened. "We'll never surrender. Not while there's still breath in our lungs. Get the remaining forces to the central plaza. We make our last stand there." Vera's voice cracked. "Xalar, there's nothing left to protect. Gyra is gone." Xalar stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the horizon. He could see the glowing shapes of the human fleet in the distance, the enormous ships hovering over the wreckage. Their attack had been surgical, precise, and brutal. Gyra had fallen, and with it, the last hope of the Gyrian people. But there was one thing the Deathworlders had not counted on: the strength of Gyrian will. "We fight," Xalar said finally, his voice unwavering, "because that's all we have left." The Gyrian forces gathered in the central plaza, a small, battered group of soldiers, civilians, and refugees. They knew the end was near, but they would face it on their terms. The once magnificent structures that surrounded them were now charred remnants of their former glory, their towering spires reduced to rubble. Xalar addressed the gathered crowd, his voice steady despite the weight of his emotions. "This is the last battle of Gyra. We may not win, but we will make the Deathworlders remember us. We will not die quietly. We will fight for our legacy, for our honor, for everything we once were." As he spoke, a sudden, deafening roar filled the air. The human ships had begun their descent, their engines rumbling as they positioned themselves directly above the plaza. It was the final wave. No more hesitation, no more negotiation. The Deathworlders had come to finish what they had started. Xalar watched as the human forces began to deploy. They were no longer the cold, calculated invaders from the sky. Now, they were in their element on the ground, advancing toward the remnants of Gyra's last defense. "Make them remember us," Xalar whispered, his voice a solemn vow. The Gyrians opened fire, their weapons firing in quick, concentrated bursts. But their guns were no match for the human armor. The Deathworlders charged forward, their soldiers moving like a well-oiled machine, their weapons firing in perfect sync. Xalar fought with everything he had left. He cut through the human ranks with the precision and fury of a cornered beast. But every blow he struck seemed to make no difference. They were too strong, too relentless. As the battle raged on, Xalar's mind began to race. Was this truly the end for his people? Was there nothing left to fight for? Suddenly, the human commander, Captain Rook, appeared at the head of his soldiers. He was tall, imposing, and his armor was scratched from the fighting, but his expression remained unyielding. He looked directly at Xalar, his eyes hidden behind the visor of his helmet. "You Gyrians are resilient," Captain Rook's voice echoed through the chaos. "But it's over. You've lost." Xalar's blade glinted in the firelight as he raised it one last time. "We'll never surrender," he spat. "Not as long as we breathe, Captain." Rook gave a slight nod to his soldiers. Without hesitation, they opened fire on the Gyrian lines. And in an instant, Xalar felt the sting of energy blasts ripping through his armor. He stumbled, blood spilling from his side as the world around him spun. But even as the darkness crept in, he refused to fall. He struggled to stay on his feet, his eyes fixed on the human commander. "This is not the end," Xalar whispered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the battle. "Our legacy will live on." As he collapsed to his knees, the last thing Xalar saw was the human fleet above him, dark silhouettes against the flames of his world. Gyra was gone. But its story, its struggle would never be forgotten. It would live on in the hearts of those who had fought, who had resisted, and who had given everything for their home. The Deathworlders had won, but the spirit of Gyra would endure.